The blood test results fell from my trembling hands as my daughter's voice cracked through the silence of our kitchen. "Mom, what is this? Why does it say I'm not a match?" Sarah stood before me, her face drained of color, clutching a medical document she was never supposed to find. The family secret I'd buried for 23 years now lay exposed between us like a raw, pulsing wound. Her eyes, those beautiful hazel eyes so unlike mine or Richard's, searched my face for answers I'd prayed I'd never have to give. I was going to be Dad's kidney donor. I was going to save his life. But this says I'm not even related to him. How is that possible? Her voice escalated with each word, a crescendo of confusion and betrayal. "Mom, tell me this is a mistake." But it wasn't a mistake. It was the truth I'd concealed beneath layers of suburban normalcy in our Salem, Massachusetts home. The white picket fence, the family portraits spanning decades on our hallway walls, the father-daughter dances, the fishing trips, all of it suddenly questioned by a single sheet of paper. I reached for her, but Sarah recoiled as if my touch might burn. "Don't," she whispered, backing away. "Just tell me who I am." The grandfather clock in our living room ticked loudly, marking the seconds of this unbearable moment. Outside, our maple trees swayed in the October wind, their red and gold leaves detaching and swirling, everything falling apart, just like my carefully constructed life. "You're my daughter," I said finally, my voice barely audible. "You've always been my daughter, but not Dad's," she replied, her words like shards of glass. "Does he know?" The weight of 2 decades of secrecy pressed down on my chest. Richard lay in a hospital bed across town, his kidneys failing, awaiting a transplant we now all knew couldn't come from our daughter. Our daughter. He'd always called her that, from the moment I placed her in his arms at the hospital. "Sit down, Sarah." I gestured to our kitchen table, the same one where we'd celebrated her birthdays, helped with homework, and shared thousands of family meals. "There's something I need to tell you." "I don't want to sit," she snapped, tears streaming down her face. "I want the truth. All of it. Right now. The truth." Such a simple word for something so complicated. The truth was a tapestry of love, desperation, mistakes, and sacrifices that had begun long before she was born. The truth was something I'd protected her from, convinced it would only cause pain. "It happened before you were born," I began, my voice steadying as I stepped into the story I'd rehearsed in my mind countless times but never spoken aloud. "Before your father and I were married. We were engaged, and he was deployed overseas with his unit." Sarah's eyes narrowed, her breathing shallow. "So you cheated on Dad while he was serving his country? Is that what you're telling me?" Her words stung, but they weren't entirely accurate. The reality was both simpler and more complex. "No, it wasn't like that," I said, moving toward the kitchen window. Our neighbor Mrs. Henderson was walking her corgi down the sidewalk, oblivious to the earthquake happening inside our home. "Your father and I had broken up. He'd ended our engagement before his deployment. He said the distance would be too much, that it wasn't fair to either of us. So you just moved on immediately? Found someone else to sleep with?" The disgust in her voice was unbearable. I was heartbroken, Sarah. I thought my life with Richard was over. I stopped, wondering how much detail to share, how much she needed to know, versus how much would only hurt her more. I made choices during that time that I'm not proud of. And then, when I discovered I was pregnant with you, everything changed. Her face contorted with a new realization. "Dad came back and you just pretended I was his? You've been lying to both of us for my entire life?" The family photos on our refrigerator mocked me now. Sarah's graduation, her first day of kindergarten with Richard, kneeling proudly beside her. The father-daughter trip to the Grand Canyon when she was 16. Every milestone, every memory now called into question. When your father returned 3 months later, he apologized. He said leaving was the biggest mistake of his life. He wanted to marry me, to build a future together, and I couldn't bear to lose him again. "So you lied," Sarah said flatly. "You trapped him." I shook my head vehemently. "No. When I told him about the pregnancy, I also told him the truth, that the baby wasn't biologically his. I gave him every opportunity to walk away." Sarah's eyes widened slightly. "He knew. All this time, Dad knew I wasn't his daughter. He knew you weren't his biologically," I corrected gently. "But from the moment he chose to stay, from the moment he first held you in the hospital, you became his daughter in every way that matters. He loved you instantly And completely, Sarah. That's never been a lie. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, a storm approaching, much like the one brewing in our kitchen. 23 years of family history were being rewritten in my daughter's mind, and I could see her struggling to process it all. "Who is my biological father, then?" she asked, her voice smaller now. And there it was, the question I dreaded most. I took a deep breath and prepared to unravel the final thread of our family tapestry. "My name is Eleanor Mitchell. Everyone in Salem knows me as Ellie, the woman who makes the best apple pies at the church bake sale, who volunteers at the hospital gift shop every Wednesday, who's been married to Richard Mitchell, the respected high school history teacher, for nearly 25 years. The woman whose daughter Sarah graduated summa cum laude from Boston University last year and is now in her first year of medical school. The woman whose beautiful colonial home on Maple Street has been featured twice in the local historical society's home tour. What they don't know is how I've carried this secret every day, like stones in my pockets, weighing me down even as I smiled through PTA meetings and neighborhood barbecues. At 52, I've spent most of my adult life constructing a fortress around our family, brick by careful brick. I abandoned my dreams of becoming an architect to raise Sarah, to create the stable home I never had growing up with parents who moved us from one military base to another. Instead, I channeled my creativity into restoring our 1920s colonial house, designing garden spaces, and occasionally teaching art classes at the community center. When Richard was diagnosed with polycystic kidney disease 3 years ago, I became his caretaker too. The disease progressed slowly at first, manageable with medication and diet changes. I researched every treatment option, accompanied him to every appointment, and meticulously tracked his laboratory values in a leather-bound notebook. I learned to administer his injections when his hemoglobin dropped too low, and to prepare meals with precise sodium and potassium content. Our kitchen counter, once reserved for cookie baking and science project assembly, gradually transformed into a medication station. Pill organizers, prescription bottles, and medical supplies became as familiar as spice jars and flour canisters. I mastered the art of incorporating medications into our routine so seamlessly that visitors rarely noticed the medical undercurrent of our home. Sarah would call from medical school, eager to discuss her father's case, to apply her growing knowledge to his condition. The irony was painful. Her passionate interest in nephrology, inspired by her father's illness, leading her toward a specialization that would now be clouded by this revelation. 2 months ago, when Richard's kidney function plummeted below 15%, dialysis became inevitable. 3 days a week, I drive him to the dialysis center, settling him into the recliner with a blanket and his favorite Louis L'Amour Western. I sit beside him for the 4-hour treatments, grading papers he's too exhausted to mark himself, while machines filter his blood and perform the work his kidneys no longer can. The strain shows in the new lines around his eyes, in the way his clothes hang loose on his once sturdy frame. At night, I massage his legs when the cramps wake him, and during the day, I've learned to anticipate the waves of nausea and fatigue that follow his treatments. I've become an expert in managing the symptoms of a disease I can't cure. From the beginning, Sarah insisted she would be tested as a potential donor. "It's a no-brainer, Mom," she'd said with the confidence of youth. "I'm young, I'm healthy, and I only need one kidney. Dad can have the other." Richard had protested initially, not wanting to put his daughter at risk, but Sarah was determined. She'd already begun the preliminary testing process while home on spring break, confident in her compatibility with the father who had taught her to ride a bike, who had built her a treehouse, who had never once treated her as anything less than his own flesh and blood. I should have stopped her then. I should have found a way to prevent the test without revealing the truth. But a part of me, a foolish, hopeful part, thought perhaps the universe would provide a miracle. Perhaps by some cosmic coincidence, she would be a match despite the lack of biological connection. But science doesn't work that way. DNA doesn't lie. And now, standing in our kitchen with the truth exposed, I realize how naive I'd been to think this secret could remain buried forever. Our modest living room is visible from where we stand, the space where we've celebrated Christmases, Thanksgivings, and countless Sunday afternoon movie marathons. The worn leather sofa where Richard still falls asleep watching Red Sox games. The antique coffee table Sarah made in high school woodshop. The wall of family photos that now feel like elaborate props in a play we've all been performing. Sarah follows my gaze to those photos, particularly to one taken at Cape Cod when she was 7, Richard hoisting her onto his shoulders as they faced the Atlantic Ocean. Has my whole life been a lie? She whispers. No, I say firmly. The love in this family has always been real. Always. But I understand her question. When the foundation shifts, everything built upon it seems suddenly suspect. I move to make tea, a reflexive action, something to do with my hands. The familiar ritual of filling the kettle, selecting the chamomile tea bags, Sarah's favorite since childhood, and setting out the blue ceramic mugs gives me a moment to gather my thoughts. The kitchen has always been my domain, the heart of our home where I've nourished my family through celebrations and sorrows alike. Your father is the only dad you've ever known, I say as I wait for the water to boil. The man who taught you to drive in the high school parking lot. Who built you that ridiculous potato launcher for your science project? Who sat through every dance recital and soccer game? But he's not my father, Sarah insists, her voice catching. Biology isn't everything, Sarah. Family is more than DNA. Easy for you to say when you're not the one who's just discovered your entire identity is based on a lie. Her words echo off the tiled backsplash I'd carefully selected and installed myself years ago. Another renovation project to make our house more of a home. The kettle whistles, and I pour the steaming water over the tea bags, watching the water darken as it steeps. How many difficult conversations had these mugs witnessed over the years? College decisions, boyfriend breakups, career choices, but none as earth-shattering as this. Your father is dying, I say quietly, the reality of Richard's condition hanging heavy between us. The transplant list is long, and his condition is deteriorating. We hoped you would be his best chance. Sarah's eyes fill with fresh tears, and now I can't even save him. Another thing this secret has stolen from me. I place a mug in front of her, the steam rising between us like the ghost of the family we were just hours ago. There are other options, other potential donors. Your father has 3 siblings, cousins. Stop calling him that, Sarah snaps. If he's not my biological father, who is? You still haven't answered that question. I wrap my hands around my own mug, drawing comfort from its warmth. Outside, the first drops of rain begin to patter against the kitchen window. The storm has arrived. His name was James Calloway, I finally said, the name feeling strange on my tongue after so many years of silence. He was a visiting professor at the community college where I worked in the administration office. He taught American literature for 1 semester while on sabbatical from Dartmouth. Sarah's expression hardened. A professor. So that's where I get my brains? Not from Dad? Not from Richard? The casual cruelty of her words stung. Richard had been the one who'd spent countless evenings at the kitchen table helping with homework, who'd built her science fair projects, who'd driven her to academic competitions across 3 states. Your intelligence comes from both Richard and me, I said firmly, and from your own dedication. Your father may not have given you his DNA, but he gave you his love of history, his curiosity, his work ethic. Did you love him? This James person? Sarah demanded, ignoring my attempt to redirect the conversation. I hesitated, uncertain how to answer. The truth was complicated, messy, unfit for the sanitized family narrative we'd maintained for decades. It wasn't about love, I said finally. It was a mistake, a relationship that never should have happened. Sarah's laugh was bitter, cutting. A mistake. That's what I am to you? A mistake? No. I reached for her hand across the table, but she pulled away. You were never a mistake, Sarah. Never. You were always wanted, always loved. By Richard, maybe. The man who isn't even my real father. But what about you? Did you want me? Or was I just a complication you had to manage? The unfairness of her accusation took my breath away. Hadn't I given up my career for her? Devoted my life to creating a stable, loving home? But I understood her anger was born of shock and betrayal, so I swallowed my defense. I wanted you from the moment I knew about you, I said quietly. I've loved you every second of every day since you were born. And this James Calloway? Did he want me too? Or did he just walk away without a care? This was the question I dreaded most. The answer would only hurt her further, but I'd promised the truth. All of it. He didn't know about you, I admitted. When I discovered I was pregnant, he had already returned to Dartmouth. And then, when Richard came back and wanted to reconcile, you took the easy way out. Sarah finished for me. You found a replacement father and pretended the other one never existed. It wasn't like that, I protested weakly. But wasn't it? Hadn't I chosen the path of least resistance, the solution that would preserve my relationship with Richard and provide my child with a stable home? Does James know about me now? Has he known all these years while I've been oblivious? Sarah's voice trembled with a new fear, that there was yet another layer to this deception. No, I assured her. As far as I know, he never learned about the pregnancy. After the semester ended, he returned to New Hampshire. I never contacted him again. Sarah pushed back from the table suddenly, her chair scraping against the tile floor. I need to look him up. Right now. Sarah, wait. But she was already pulling her phone from her pocket, her fingers flying over the screen. I watched helplessly as she searched for the man who had contributed half her genetic code, but none of her upbringing. James Calloway, Dartmouth, American Literature, she muttered as she typed. Within seconds, her expression changed. Here he is, Professor James Calloway, Department Chair of American Literature at Dartmouth College. He looks normal. She turned the phone toward me, and I felt a jolt of recognition. He'd aged, of course, his dark hair now silver at the temples, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 24 years ago, but it was unmistakably him. He has my eyes, Sarah whispered, her anger momentarily replaced by wonder as she looked back at the screen. And my nose. How did I never notice that I don't look like Dad, like Richard? People see what they expect to see, I said softly. And you have my smile, my cheekbones. No one had reason to question it. Sarah scrolled further, her expression darkening again. He's got an impressive bibliography, books, articles, awards, a whole career while I didn't even know he existed. She continued reading, then froze. He has other children, 2 sons, both younger than me. There's a family photo from some faculty event. The pain in her voice was unbearable. My daughter, my beautiful, accomplished daughter, was discovering not only that her parentage was a lie, but that she had half-siblings she'd never known. I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm so sorry. She looked up from the phone, her eyes suddenly cold. You know what the worst part is? I've spent my entire life thinking I knew who I was. Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, daughter of Richard and Eleanor Mitchell. And now I find out that half of my identity, half of my genetic makeup, comes from a stranger, a man who's been living his life less than 3 hours away from me all these years. Sarah, I'm going to contact him, she announced, her chin lifting in determination. I have a right to know my biological father. Panic surged through me. Please think about what that might do to him, to his family, to Richard. Oh, now you're worried about honesty? About how the truth might hurt people? Her voice dripped with sarcasm. Where was this concern for the past 23 years? I was protecting our family, I insisted. No, you were protecting yourself, she shot back. Your comfortable life, your reputation in this town. What would the good people of Salem think if they knew perfect Eleanor Mitchell had gotten pregnant by another man while her fiancé was deployed? Her words hit their mark with devastating accuracy. Hadn't there been an element of self-preservation in my decision? A desire to avoid the whispers, the judgment, the scarlet letter I might as well have worn? You're right, I admitted, my voice barely audible over the rain now drumming against our roof. I was afraid of what people would think, but mostly I was afraid of losing Richard, of losing the chance for us to be a family. Well, congratulations on maintaining the illusion all these years, Sarah said bitterly. But it's over now, and I'm going to call James Calloway right now and tell him he has a daughter. She stood up, phone in hand, heading for the stairs. Sarah, please wait. I'm going to my room to make this call in private, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. Don't follow me. Don't try to stop me. At least talk to your father first, I pleaded. Richard deserves to hear about this from you, not from some stranger. Richard, she said coldly, has been lying to me my entire life, just like you have. She climbed the stairs without looking back, each footstep an indictment. I heard her bedroom door slam, the same door that had slammed through her teenage years, when we argued about curfews and boyfriends, normal parent-child conflicts that now seemed laughably trivial compared to this chasm that had opened between us. I sank back into my chair at the kitchen table, surrounded by the wreckage of our family truth. Through the window, I could see the garden Richard and I had planted together last spring, the rose bushes he'd insisted on adding because Sarah loved fresh flowers in the house. Everything in our home, everything in our lives, was interwoven with love and care, and yes, with deception too. The rain fell harder outside, mirroring the tears that now flowed freely down my face. Upstairs, my daughter was about to make a call that might forever alter the course of all our lives. I remember the day Sarah was born as if it were yesterday, a sweltering August afternoon, the hospital room stifling despite the air conditioning. Richard had held my hand through 16 hours of labor, his palms sweaty against mine, his voice steady in my ear. "You're doing great, Ellie. She's almost here. Our daughter is almost here. Our daughter." He'd been saying those words for months, ever since the ultrasound revealed we were having a girl. Never once had he hesitated to claim this child as his own, even knowing the truth of her conception. When they placed Sarah in my arms, red-faced and squalling with healthy lungs, Richard had wept. Not silent, dignified tears, but deep, body-shaking sobs of pure joy. He'd pressed his lips to her tiny forehead and whispered, "Hello, Sarah. I'm your dad, and I've been waiting my whole life to meet you." Later, when the nurses took her to the nursery and we were alone, Richard had sat on the edge of my hospital bed and taken both my hands in his. "She's perfect, Ellie," he'd said, his voice rough with emotion. "Absolutely perfect." "She is," I'd agreed, exhausted but happier than I'd ever been. "I want you to know something," he'd continued, his blue eyes serious and intent on mine. "From this moment forward, she is my daughter, completely and absolutely. I don't ever want to hear you call her anything else or think of her as anything else. The circumstances of her conception don't matter. What matters is that I will love her and raise her as my own for the rest of my life." I'd cried then, overwhelmed by the generosity of this man who'd taken us both into his heart without reservation. "I don't deserve you," I'd whispered. "We deserve each other," he'd corrected me. "And Sarah deserves a family who loves her unconditionally. That's what we're going to give her." And we had. For 23 years, we'd given her exactly that. I remember the endless nights of colic when Sarah was 3 months old. Richard and I would take turns walking the floors with her, gently bouncing and shushing as she wailed. One particularly brutal night, after she'd been crying for hours, I'd broken down in exhausted tears. "I can't do this anymore," I'd sobbed. "I'm a terrible mother. I can't even comfort my own baby." Richard had taken Sarah from my arms and guided me to our bed. "Get some sleep," he'd said firmly. "I've got her." When I woke 4 hours later, the longest stretch of sleep I'd had in weeks, I'd found them in the living room. Richard was asleep on the sofa with Sarah peacefully slumbering on his chest, his hand protectively covering her tiny back. Beside them on the coffee table was a legal pad filled with Richard's neat handwriting. Things to try when Sarah has colic. He'd made a methodical list of techniques and checked off each one, noting her responses. That was Richard, always the teacher, always approaching problems with systematic care. He'd applied the same thoroughness to every aspect of parenting, from researching the safest car seats to creating elaborate systems for tracking her developmental milestones. When Sarah was 5 and starting kindergarten, she'd developed a sudden, intense fear of separation. Each morning had become a tearful battle, with her clinging to my legs and begging not to be left at school. After a week of this struggle, Richard had taken a personal day from his teaching job and shown up at our house in the morning with a small wrapped package. "This is for you, Pumpkin," he'd said, kneeling to Sarah's level. Inside was a small heart-shaped locket on a delicate silver chain. When opened, it contained a tiny family photo of the 3 of us. "Now you can take us with you wherever you go," Richard had explained. "And whenever you miss us, you can hold this locket and remember that we're always in your heart, just like you're always in ours." Sarah had worn that locket every day for years, often reaching for it during moments of stress or uncertainty. She still had it, tucked away in her jewelry box upstairs, a tangible reminder of her father's love and thoughtfulness. I remember the summer Sarah was 12 and determined to build a treehouse in our backyard maple. Richard had spent hours at the library researching safe treehouse construction, then drawn up detailed plans that incorporated Sarah's childish sketches. For 6 weekends straight, they'd worked together in the summer heat, Richard patiently teaching her to measure, saw, and hammer. I'd bring them lemonade and watch from the kitchen window, marveling at their shared determination and the easy way they communicated without words, anticipating each other's needs with synchronized movements. When Sarah fell from the ladder and broke her arm halfway through the project, Richard had been distraught, blaming himself, even though he'd insisted on safety precautions that Sarah, in her adolescent impetuousness, had ignored. He'd slept in a chair beside her bed that night, watching over her as if she might shatter into pieces if left unattended. The treehouse was completed with Sarah directing from a lawn chair, her purple cast covered in her friends' signatures. When it was finally finished, Richard had carried her up the ladder on his back, so she could be the first to enter their creation. That treehouse still stood in our backyard, weathered by New England seasons but sturdy and secure, much like Richard's love for his daughter. I remember Sarah's 16th birthday, when Richard had taken on extra summer school classes to save enough money for her first car, a used Honda Civic that he'd spent months secretly restoring in our neighbor's garage. The look on Sarah's face when he'd let her outside and placed the keys in her hand was something I'll never forget. Pure, uncomplicated joy and the dawning realization of how much her father had sacrificed to make her happy. I remember the day Sarah received her acceptance letter from Boston University. Richard had framed the letter that very evening, hanging it in his study alongside his own diplomas, as if her achievement were an extension of his own pride. In many ways it was. He'd spent countless evenings reviewing her college essays, quizzing her for SATs, and driving her to campus visits across New England. When the financial aid package had fallen short, Richard had withdrawn money from his retirement account without hesitation. "My education is what gave me a chance at a good life," he'd said, when I expressed concern about our financial future. "I won't deny her the same opportunity." That first semester, when homesickness had hit Sarah hard, Richard had sent her a care package every single week, each one containing some small reminder of home, along with his famous chocolate chip cookies, carefully wrapped to survive the journey to Boston. He'd included handwritten notes of encouragement, dad jokes that made her roll her eyes and smile, and newspaper clippings of local events so she wouldn't feel she was missing out. I remember the night before Sarah's college graduation, when Richard, already showing signs of his illness though we didn't yet have a diagnosis, had stayed up until 3 a.m, creating a photo slideshow, documenting her journey from infancy to adulthood. The final slide had read simply, "Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, the greatest gift of our lives." And he'd meant it. Every word, every gesture, every sacrifice over 23 years had proven that biology was the least important factor in being a father. Richard had chosen fatherhood every single day, embracing it with a wholeness of heart that many biological fathers never achieve. Now, as I sat alone in our kitchen with rain streaming down the windows, I wondered if Sarah would ever be able to see that truth again, or if the revelation of her biological origins would permanently overshadow the lifetime of love Richard had given her. Upstairs, my daughter was reaching out to a stranger who shared her DNA, but knew nothing of her first steps, her childhood fears, her teenage dreams. Meanwhile, the man who had been there for all of those moments lay in a hospital bed across town, his body failing him, unaware that his family was fracturing in his absence. The weight of what I'd done, both 24 years ago and in the keeping of this secret, pressed down on me until I could barely breathe. The hospital corridor seemed longer than usual as I made my way toward Richard's room the next morning. Sarah had spent the night locked in her bedroom, ignoring my knocks and pleas to talk. When I'd left the house at dawn, her door was still closed, but I knew she was awake. The light visible beneath her door, the occasional sound of movement inside. What had happened with her call to James Calloway? Had she reached him? What had she said? The questions had kept me awake all night, but I had a more immediate concern now. Richard needed to be told the truth before he heard it from someone else. I paused outside his room, gathering my courage. Through the partially open door, I could see him sitting up in bed, looking better than he had in days. The dialysis was working, at least temporarily, giving him a reprieve from the worst symptoms of his disease. "Richard," I said softly as I entered, setting my purse on the visitor's chair. He looked up with a smile that still, after all these years, made my heart skip. "There's my beautiful wife. I was beginning to think you'd forgotten me." "Never," I said, leaning down to kiss his forehead. His skin was cool and dry, a good sign after the fevers that had plagued him recently. "How's our girl?" he asked, as he did every day. "Did she get back to school okay?" Sarah had been home for the weekend, ostensibly to visit her father but primarily to complete her donor testing. She was supposed to have returned to Boston yesterday evening. "She's still at home," I said carefully, taking his hand. "Richard, there's something I need to tell you." But before I could continue, a commotion in the doorway drew our attention. Sarah stood there, her face pale and set, her eyes red-rimmed from crying or lack of sleep, or both. And beside her stood a tall, distinguished-looking man with silver-streaked dark hair and hazel eyes identical to Sarah's. James Calloway, in the flesh, standing in my husband's hospital room. My heart seemed to stop, then restart at a frantic pace. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not like this. Sarah? Richard's voice was confused. Who's this? Sarah stepped forward, her expression a mixture of determination and anguish. Dad, this is Professor James Calloway, my biological father. The words fell into the room like stones into still water, creating ripples that would never be contained. Richard's face drained of color, his eyes darting from Sarah to James to me, seeking an explanation, a denial, anything to make sense of this sudden collision of past and present. Eleanor? He whispered, his voice barely audible. I couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but watch in horror as my worst fear materialized before my eyes. James Calloway cleared his throat uncomfortably. Mr. Mitchell, I realize this is unorthodox. I only learned about Sarah last night when she called me. I had no idea. You had no idea you had a daughter, Richard finished for him, his voice suddenly steady. Because my wife never told you. The lack of accusation in his tone was somehow worse than anger would have been. It was resignation, as if he'd always known this moment might come. Dad, I'm sorry, Sarah said, moving to his bedside. I know I should have talked to you first, but I was so angry and confused, and I just needed to know. It's okay, Sarah, Richard interrupted, reaching for her hand. You have every right to know where you come from. I've never wanted to keep you from that. His words struck me like physical blows. He'd said we, automatically including me in a decision I'd made alone, shouldering the burden of my deception as if it had been a mutual choice. Why don't you give us a minute, Sarah? Richard suggested gently. Professor Calloway, too. I'd like to speak with your mother privately. Sarah hesitated, then nodded, leading James back into the hallway. The door closed behind them with a soft click that seemed to seal our fate. The silence between us stretched, taut and unbearable. You should have told me they were coming, Richard said finally, his voice tired. I didn't know, I whispered. Sarah found out yesterday. The donor test results. She found them, and she figured it out. She called him without telling me. Richard closed his eyes briefly. All these years, Ellie, all these years, we've lived with this secret hanging over us. I always wondered when it would finally catch up to us. I'm so sorry, I said, the words wholly inadequate for the magnitude of what I'd done. I never meant for it to happen this way. I was coming here to tell you that Sarah knew the truth. I wanted you to hear it from me, but you didn't want me to hear it at all, did you? He asked, his eyes opening to fix on mine. You were content to let the secret stay buried, even when Sarah volunteered to be my donor, even knowing that test would reveal everything. The accuracy of his assessment left me speechless. He was right. I'd been willing to risk everything rather than face the truth. I began, then stopped, unsure how to explain my twisted reasoning. You thought what? That the test would somehow not show she wasn't a biological match? That science would bend to accommodate our lie? His voice held no anger, only a profound weariness. I don't know what I thought, I admitted. I just couldn't bear to destroy our family. Our family, Richard repeated, the words hanging in the air between us. The family we built on a foundation of lies. Not lies, I protested weakly. Love. We built it on love. Love and lies aren't mutually exclusive, Ellie. I've loved you and Sarah with everything I have, but we still lied to her every day of her life. The we, again, still protecting me, even now. I lied. I corrected. This was my decision, my deception. You wanted to tell her from the beginning. Richard had indeed suggested, when Sarah was still small, that we should find an age-appropriate way to explain her parentage. I'd been the one to resist, to insist it would only confuse and hurt her. As she grew older, it had become easier to maintain the silence, to convince ourselves that revealing the truth would cause unnecessary pain. It doesn't matter now, Richard sighed. What's done is done. Sarah knows the truth, and she's found her biological father. The question is what happens next. Before I could respond, the door opened again. A nurse entered, followed by Dr. Patel, Richard's nephrologist. "Good morning, Mr. Mitchell," Dr. Patel said, her expression serious as she glanced at the tablet in her hand. "I've been reviewing your latest lab results, and I'm afraid they're not what we'd hoped for." Richard nodded resignedly. "The dialysis isn't working as well anymore, is it?" "No, it's not," Dr. Patel confirmed. "Your creatinine levels continue to rise, and your GFR is now below 10%. We need to discuss more aggressive treatment options." "You mean a transplant?" Richard said. "But as you now know, my daughter isn't a compatible donor." Dr. Patel looked confused. "Actually, that's part of why I'm here. I've just received the complete donor workup for Sarah, and while she isn't a blood relative as we previously thought, she's still a potential match." My head snapped up. "What?" "It's unusual, but it happens," Dr. Patel explained. "Non-relatives can sometimes be compatible donors if certain HLA antigens align correctly. Sarah's preliminary cross-match results are actually quite promising." Richard and I stared at each other in shock. "So she could still be my donor?" Richard asked, his voice barely audible. "Potentially, yes," Dr. Patel said. "We'd need to run additional tests, of course, but based on what we've seen so far, she's a better match than most non-related donors would be. It's quite remarkable, actually." The irony was staggering. After everything that had happened, the secret exposed, our family in turmoil, Sarah might still be able to give Richard the kidney he so desperately needed. "I'll leave you to discuss this," Dr. Patel said, sensing the tension in the room. "But we shouldn't delay much longer, Mr. Mitchell. Your condition is deteriorating more rapidly than we'd hoped." After she left, Richard and I sat in stunned silence. Outside his room, I could hear Sarah and James talking in low voices, two strangers connected by blood, trying to make sense of their sudden connection. "She won't do it now," I whispered, voicing my deepest fear. "Why would she? After what I've done, what we've done, she'll never forgive us enough to go through with the donation." Richard reached for my hand, his grip surprisingly strong despite his illness. "You don't know that, Ellie. You don't know our daughter at all if you think she'd let me die out of anger or spite. Our daughter, still our daughter, despite everything. But she brought him here," I said, nodding toward the door. "She brought her biological father to your hospital room, Richard. If that's not a rejection of everything we've been to her, I don't know what is. Or maybe," Richard suggested quietly, "she brought him here because she needed all of her parents in one room to figure out who she really is." I stood by the window in Richard's hospital room, watching the rain continue to fall outside. Sarah and James had gone to the cafeteria, an awkward father-daughter coffee break 23 years overdue. Richard had drifted into a restless sleep, exhausted by the emotional upheaval and his ongoing illness. For the first time in decades, I was truly alone with my thoughts, forced to confront the consequences of choices made half a lifetime ago. I'd spent years building a carefully constructed reality, the devoted wife, the loving mother, the respected member of our community. I'd poured all my energy into creating the perfect family life, as if sheer force of will and meticulous attention to detail could compensate for the lie at its foundation. Looking back now, I could see that my dedication to maintaining our facade had become a kind of obsession. The immaculate house, the perfect holiday celebrations, the family portraits with everyone wearing coordinating outfits, all of it designed to project an image of domestic harmony that would never be questioned. I'd volunteered at Sarah's schools, not just to be involved in her education, but to establish myself as an ever-present, beyond-reproach mother figure. I'd hosted dinner parties for Richard's colleagues not just out of hospitality, but to strengthen our image as the ideal faculty family. I'd immersed myself in community service, partly out of genuine desire to help, but also to build a reputation that would serve as armor against potential scandal. All those years of vigilance had left little room for genuine self-reflection. I'd never allowed myself to fully process the choices I'd made as a young woman. The broken engagement, the brief affair with James, the decision to rebuild my life with Richard without full disclosure to everyone involved. Standing in that sterile hospital room, watching the world outside continue to turn despite my personal earthquake, I finally asked myself the questions I'd been avoiding for 24 years. Who was I beneath the roles I'd so carefully played? What did I actually want, beyond maintaining the status quo? And what did I owe to the people I claimed to love? The answers didn't come easily. For so long, my identity had been defined by my relationships to others. Richard's wife, Sarah's mother, Salem's model citizen. I'd forgotten how to exist as simply Eleanor, a woman with her own desires, flaws, and capacity for growth. A soft knock at the door interrupted my reverie. Sarah stood in the doorway alone, her expression unreadable. "Where's James?" I asked quietly, careful not to wake Richard. "He went to check into a hotel," she replied, stepping into the room. "He's staying in Salem for a few days. He thinks we have a lot to talk about." I nodded, unsure what to say. The territorial mother in me wanted to scream that this man had no right to my daughter's time or attention. But the rational part of me knew that ship had sailed the moment Sarah had discovered the truth. "He seems nice," I offered lamely. Sarah gave a humorless laugh. "He's a stranger who happens to share my DNA. I don't know if he's nice or not." She moved to stand beside me at the window, both of us looking out at the rain-drenched hospital parking lot. "He told me he never knew about me," she said after a moment. "That you never contacted him after what happened between you." "That's true," I confirmed. "When I found out I was pregnant, he was already gone. And then when Richard came back, it seemed simpler to leave the past in the past." "Simpler for whom?" Sarah asked, her voice sharp. "For everyone," I replied honestly. "For me, for Richard, for you, and yes, for James too. He had his own life, his own career path. A child would have complicated all of that. So you made the decision for all of us." "I did," I admitted. "I was 28 years old, pregnant, and scared. I made the choice I thought was best at the time." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, watching the windshield wipers of cars in the parking lot beat a steady rhythm against the rain. "Dr. Patel told me I might still be able to donate a kidney to Dad," she said finally. "Isn't that ironic? All this secrecy, all this deception, and it turns out I could have been his donor anyway." "Will you do it?" I asked, hardly daring to hope. Sarah turned to look at the sleeping form of the man who had raised her. "How could I not?" she said softly. "Whatever lies you both told, whatever truths you withheld, he's still my father. The only one who was there for every skinned knee, every school play, every heartbreak." Relief washed over me, so powerful that I had to grip the windowsill for support. "Thank you, Sarah." She turned to face me fully, her eyes hard. "I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for him, and for me, because I couldn't live with myself if I let him die when I could save him." Her words stung, but I nodded in acceptance. I had no right to expect forgiveness. Not yet. "I understand." "No, I don't think you do," Sarah continued. "Do you know what James said to me in the cafeteria? He said that finding out about me was shocking, but that he felt honored that I would reach out to him after all this time. Honored, Mom. Not burdened, not inconvenienced. Honored." I swallowed hard. "He seems like a good man." "He is, but that's not the point. The point is that you never gave him the chance to be a father to me. You never gave me the chance to know him. You made those choices for both of us because they were convenient for you." The truth in her assessment was undeniable. I had made those choices largely for my own benefit, disguising self-interest as protection. "You're right," I said, the admission like glass in my throat. I was selfish. I was scared of losing Richard, scared of being a single mother, scared of the judgment I would face. So I took the path that seemed easiest at the time. "At least you're finally being honest," Sarah said, a hint of surprise in her voice. "I should have been honest from the beginning," I acknowledged. "With Richard, with you when you were old enough to understand, even with James. I see that now. I got so caught up in protecting what we had that I couldn't bear the thought of risking it. What we had was built on lies," Sarah pointed out, echoing Richard's earlier words. "No," I said firmly, surprising myself with my conviction. "The love was real, is real. Whatever mistakes I made, whatever lies I told, I have loved you and your father completely and without reservation. That has never been a lie." Sarah didn't respond immediately. She moved to Richard's bedside, gently adjusting his blanket as it had slipped down. "I believe you love us," she said finally. "But love without honesty is incomplete. It's conditional. You only loved us within the boundaries of your carefully constructed story." Her insight struck me with the force of revelation. She was right. I'd only been capable of loving within the constraints of the narrative I'd created. I'd never risked loving them enough to be fully honest, to be vulnerable, to trust that our bonds could withstand the truth. "I want to do better," I said, the words emerging from some newly awakened part of myself. I want to love you both more completely, more honestly than I have before, if you'll let me. Sarah looked at me for a long moment, her expression softening slightly. I don't know if I can forgive you yet, but I'm willing to try to understand. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a beginning, a small opening where before there had been only a wall of anger and betrayal. That's all I can ask for, I said. As if sensing our tentative truce, Richard stirred, his eyes fluttering open. What did I miss? He asked groggily. Nothing, Dad, Sarah said, taking his hand. Just Mom and I having a long overdue honest conversation. Richard's gaze moved between us, a question in his eyes. Sarah has agreed to continue with the donor testing, I told him. If she's a match, she wants to give you a kidney. Relief and love flooded Richard's tired face. Sarah, you don't have to. I want to, she interrupted firmly. You're my dad, biology notwithstanding, and I'm not ready to lose you. Richard's eyes filled with tears. I don't deserve you, kiddo. Actually, you do, Sarah said, squeezing his hand. You're the one person in this mess who's always been completely honest about who you are and what you feel. The gentle rebuke in her words was unmistakable, but so was the love. Whatever damage had been done to our family, the bond between father and daughter remained unbroken. As I watched them together, I realized that my awakening had come too late to prevent pain, but perhaps not too late to begin healing. I had lived for decades as a keeper of secrets, a manipulator of truths, a woman so afraid of losing what she had that she'd compromised her own integrity to protect it. That woman was no longer someone I wanted to be. The days that followed passed in a blur of medical tests, uncomfortable conversations, and tentative steps toward a new kind of family dynamic. Sarah underwent additional compatibility testing and was confirmed as a viable kidney donor for Richard, a medical coincidence that felt like the universe offering us a second chance we didn't deserve. James Calloway remained in Salem, taking a room at the Harbor Inn and treading carefully around the edges of our family crisis. He met with Sarah daily, their conversations gradually evolving from awkward pleasantries to genuine curiosity about each other's lives. She learned that he shared her love of classic literature and her allergy to shellfish. He discovered that she had inherited not only his eyes, but his analytical mind, and his tendency to gesture expressively when passionate about a topic. I kept my distance from these meetings, understanding that Sarah needed space to explore this new relationship without my anxious hovering. Instead, I threw myself into Richard's care, coordinating with his medical team, researching transplant procedures, and preparing our home for his eventual recovery. One evening, a week after the initial revelation, I returned to the hospital after a quick trip home to shower and change clothes. As I approached Richard's room, I could hear voices within, Sarah and James, deep in conversation. I hesitated outside the door, not wanting to interrupt, but unable to resist listening. I appreciate you coming to see me, Richard was saying, his voice stronger than it had been in days. It can't be easy, meeting the man who raised your biological daughter. On the contrary, James replied. I've wanted to thank you since the moment Sarah told me about you. You've been the father she needed, the father I never had the chance to be. I didn't do it to be heroic, Richard said. I loved Ellie, and from the moment Sarah was born, I loved her too. It was the easiest thing in the world to be her father. Still, James insisted, many men wouldn't have made the choice you did. They would have walked away or always treated Sarah as somehow less than. You gave her a real father, a real family, a family built on lies, Sarah interjected, the bitterness still evident in her voice. Perhaps, James conceded, but lies told with good intentions, it seems to me. Your mother was trying to protect all of us. You, Richard, herself. Even me. You're defending her? Sarah sounded incredulous. She kept me from knowing my own biological father for 23 years. I'm not defending her choices, James clarified, but I'm trying to understand them, and I wonder if you've considered what might have happened if she'd made different ones. What do you mean? Sarah asked. I leaned closer to the door, suddenly needing to hear James's perspective on the choices I'd made so long ago. When your mother and I met, I was a visiting professor on a 1-year sabbatical, James explained. My career was my priority. I was ambitious, focused on publishing and securing tenure. If Eleanor had told me about you, I would have done the right thing financially. Child support, certainly. But would I have been a real father to you? Would I have moved to Massachusetts? Abandoned my career trajectory at Dartmouth? I doubt it. So I would have been some sort of weekend obligation? Sarah asked quietly. More like a holiday and summer visitation arrangement, I suspect, James admitted. I was not the man then that I am now. I wasn't ready for fatherhood, emotionally or practically, but Richard was, Sarah said, understanding dawning in her voice. By all appearances, he very much was, James agreed. He chose you, Sarah. He chose to be your father every day for 23 years. That's something I never did, because I never knew I could. The simple truth in James's words brought tears to my eyes. He'd articulated something I'd felt but never fully expressed. That my choice, however deceptive, had given Sarah the more present, more devoted father. I have something I want to show you both, I heard Sarah say. I wasn't sure whether to share this, but after everything that's happened, I think you should see it. I heard the rustle of paper, and then Richard's sharp intake of breath. Where did you find this? He asked. In Mom's studio, in the old cedar chest. I was looking for my birth certificate after I found out the truth. I found this instead. My heart began to race. I knew exactly what Sarah had discovered. The letter I'd written but never sent. The confession I'd drafted but never delivered. The truth I'd documented but kept hidden, even from myself. It's dated 2 days before my wedding to Richard, Sarah explained to James. A letter addressed to you that she never mailed. I pushed the door open then, unable to remain hidden while my deepest thoughts were exposed. 3 pairs of eyes turned to me. Richard's compassionate, Sarah's challenging, James's curious. I should have been part of this conversation, I said, moving into the room, especially if you're going to read my private thoughts aloud. Sarah held up the yellowed pages, her expression defiant. Then perhaps you'd like to read it yourself, since you're the author. I took the letter with trembling hands, recognizing my own handwriting from decades ago. The paper was soft with age. The blue ink faded, but still legible. I cleared my throat and began to read the words I'd written to James Calloway 24 years earlier. Dear James, by the time you receive this letter, if I find the courage to send it, I will be married to Richard Mitchell, the man who, despite knowing everything, wants to build a life with me and the child I'm carrying. Your child. I debated for months whether to tell you about this pregnancy. You made it clear when you left for Dartmouth that our time together was just that. A time, a moment, not a beginning. You had your career to think about, your future carefully mapped out. I had my broken heart to mend after Richard ended our engagement. Neither of us expected the consequences of those few weeks together. I want you to know that I'm not keeping this information from you out of spite or anger. I'm doing it because, after much reflection, I believe it's best for everyone involved. For you, for me, for Richard, and most importantly, for this child. Richard loves me enough to forgive my indiscretion during our separation. He loves me enough to embrace this baby as his own. He wants to be a father in every sense of the word, not out of obligation, but out of choice. Would it be fair to disrupt your life with a responsibility you never asked for? Would it be fair to deprive this child of a fully present, fully committed father? Would it be fair to create a complicated, potentially contentious co-parenting arrangement when there is a simpler, more loving alternative? I don't believe it would be. So I've made the decision to move forward with Richard, to build the family we had once planned, before fear and distance came between us. He will be this child's father in all the ways that truly matter, in daily care, in constant presence, in unwavering love. Perhaps someday, when our child is grown and can understand the complexities of adult relationships and choices, I will share the truth. Perhaps someday, you and I will meet again, and you can know the amazing person that grew from our brief connection. Until then, I wish you well, James. I hope you find everything you're seeking in your career and in your life. I hope you never regret not knowing about this child, because I truly believe I'm making the best choice for all of us. With respect and a complicated kind of gratitude, Eleanor. As I finished reading, the room fell silent. The letter had laid bare my reasoning, my justifications, my attempt to make peace with my own deception all those years ago. You never sent it, James said finally, his voice gentle. No, I admitted. I wrote it to clarify my thoughts, to convince myself I was doing the right thing. But in the end, I couldn't bring myself to open that door, even a crack. You should have, Sarah said, but the anger in her voice had diminished. Not necessarily to James, but to me, when I was old enough to understand. I know that now, I acknowledged. The longer I kept the secret, the more impossible it seemed to reveal it. Every birthday, every Father's Day, every milestone, they all became evidence of a family narrative I couldn't bear to disrupt. Richard reached for my hand, surprising me with his gesture of support. We made mistakes, Ellie. Both of us. We thought we were protecting Sarah, but we were really protecting ourselves. From discomfort, from change, from the unknown. I was more at fault than you, I insisted. You wanted to tell her when she was young. I was the one who couldn't face it. Because you were afraid I'd love her less if she knew, Richard said, his insight piercing straight to my heart. You were afraid she'd love me less. The truth of his words struck me with full force. That had been my deepest fear all along. Not the judgment of others, not even the disruption to our family structure, but the possibility that the perfect love between father and daughter would be diminished by the revelation of their lack of biological connection. Would you have? I asked Sarah, voicing the question that had haunted me for years. Would knowing the truth have changed how you felt about your father? Sarah looked at Richard, the man who had raised her, and then at James, the man who had helped create her. I don't know, she answered honestly. As a child, maybe it would have confused me. As a teenager, I might have used it as ammunition during arguments, the way teenagers do. But now, she took a deep breath. Now I understand that being a father is about so much more than DNA. It's about showing up, day after day. It's about teaching and guiding and loving, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. She reached for Richard's hand. No one has ever done that more completely than you, Dad. No one ever could. The simple truth of her statement hung in the air, powerful in its clarity. Whatever mistakes we had made, whatever lies we had told, we had given Sarah one undeniable gift, a father who had chosen her, completely and without reservation. The letter changes nothing, Sarah continued, turning back to me, but it helps me understand why you made the choices you did. You weren't being malicious or selfish, at least not entirely. You were trying to give me the family you thought I needed. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was understanding, the first essential step toward healing. The day of the transplant surgery arrived 3 weeks after Sarah discovered the truth about her parentage. Richard's condition had stabilized enough for the procedure, though his doctors warned that further delay would only increase the risks. Sarah had completed all the necessary preoperative protocols and had met extensively with the transplant team to understand exactly what she would experience as a donor. I'd watched with a mixture of pride and guilt as she'd approached each step with the methodical thoroughness she'd inherited from both Richard and, as we now knew, from James as well. James had extended his stay in Salem, canceling classes and arranging for a colleague to cover his department responsibilities. Some things are more important than work, he'd said simply, when I'd expressed surprise at his continued presence. Getting to know my daughter is one of them. He'd kept a respectful distance from our family dynamics, never pushing for more involvement than Sarah freely offered, never attempting to usurp Richard's paternal role. His quiet dignity in navigating this extraordinary situation had gradually earned my respect, reluctant though I was to admit it. The morning of the surgery, we gathered in Richard's hospital room, an unlikely family quartet bound by blood, choice, love, and long-buried secrets. Richard sat propped up in bed, his complexion gray with illness, but his eyes bright with hope for the first time in months. Sarah perched on the edge of his bed in her hospital gown, her hair pulled back in a neat braid I'd helped her with earlier. James and I occupied the visitors' chairs, maintaining a careful distance from each other while united in our concern for both patients. The surgical team should be here any minute to take you both to pre-op, I said, checking my watch for the dozenth time that hour. Relax, Mom, Sarah said with a small smile. Everything's going to be fine. Of course it is, I agreed automatically, though my stomach churned with anxiety. The rational part of my brain understood that kidney donation was a relatively safe procedure with excellent outcomes, but the mother in me couldn't help but fear for my daughter going under anesthesia, being cut open, giving up an organ, even for her beloved father. Eleanor, Richard said softly, using my full name as he always did in serious moments. Come here. I moved to his side, and he took my hand in his fingers cool and slightly trembling. Whatever happens today, he said, his voice steady despite his weakness, I want you to know that these years with you and Sarah have been the greatest gift of my life. I wouldn't change a single day of it. Don't talk like that, I protested. You're going to be fine. You'll have a healthy new kidney by this afternoon. I know, he nodded. But still, some things need to be said. He turned to James, who straightened in his chair, clearly surprised to be addressed. James, if something happens to me, I want you to be part of Sarah's life. She deserves to know both her fathers. James nodded solemnly. You have my word, though I have every confidence you'll be around to continue the excellent job you've been doing for the past 23 years. Richard smiled weakly. That's the plan. He looked at Sarah then, his expression softening. Pumpkin, are you absolutely sure about this? It's not too late to change your mind. Dad, Sarah said firmly. For the 1000th time, yes, I'm sure. This isn't even a question. I just want you to know that I would understand. Well, I wouldn't, she interrupted. I wouldn't understand choosing not to save my father's life when I have the power to do so. So please stop asking me if I'm sure, because it's honestly a little insulting. Richard chuckled, the sound transforming briefly into a cough. That's my girl, stubborn as the day is long. Wonder where I got that from, Sarah replied with a pointed look. The easy banter between them eased some of the tension in the room. They had always had this, a natural rapport, a shared sense of humor, a way of communicating that transcended words. It was one of the things that had convinced me, over the years, that my choice had been the right one. Richard and Sarah were so fundamentally connected that it seemed impossible they weren't biologically related. A knock at the door announced the arrival of Dr. Patel and the surgical team. Good morning, everyone, she said briskly. It's time to get this show on the road. 2 orderlies appeared with a wheelchair for Sarah. As they helped her into it, she suddenly reached for James's hand. Would you walk with us to the pre-op area? She asked. Both of you? She added, looking at me. James appeared momentarily startled but quickly recovered. Of course, if that's what you want. We formed an unusual procession down the hospital corridor. Richard on a gurney, Sarah in a wheelchair, James and I following behind. Outside the double doors that led to the surgical suite, we paused for final goodbyes. I hugged Sarah tightly, inhaling the familiar scent of her hair. I love you so much, I whispered. I'm so proud of you. I love you too, Mom, she replied. And I'm working on the forgiveness part. I really am. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. I moved to Richard next, kissing his forehead and then his lips. I'll be right here when you wake up, I promised. You always are, he said with a smile. James approached Sarah next, awkward but sincere. Thank you for allowing me to be here for this, he said. I wish I had the right words for this moment. You don't need the right words, Sarah told him. Just being here is enough. Finally, to everyone's surprise, James turned to Richard. Thank you, he said simply, extending his hand. For being the father I couldn't be. For raising our daughter to be the remarkable woman she is. Richard took his hand without hesitation. Thank you for understanding that family isn't always defined by biology, and for not trying to disrupt what Sarah and I have built over a lifetime. The 2 men, so different in background, appearance, and life path, yet connected now through the woman they both called daughter, shared a moment of perfect understanding. Then the double doors opened, and Sarah and Richard were wheeled away, leaving James and me alone in the corridor. I suppose we should go to the waiting room, I said awkwardly, suddenly aware that I would be spending the next several hours in this man's company. Eleanor, James said, stopping me with a gentle hand on my arm. Before we do that, I think it's time you and I had an honest conversation of our own. My stomach tightened with anxiety, but I nodded in agreement. We found a small, empty consultation room nearby and closed the door behind us. I want you to know, James began, that I don't harbor any resentment toward you for the choices you made all those years ago. I looked at him in surprise. You don't? He shook his head. When Sarah first called me, I was shocked, confused, even angry. But these past weeks, watching the family you and Richard built, seeing the extraordinary young woman Sarah has become, I can't honestly say you made the wrong choice. His words loosened something that had been tightly coiled within me for decades. You can't know how much it means to hear you say that. The truth is, Eleanor, I wasn't father material back then. I was focused on my career, on publishing, on climbing the academic ladder. Even after I eventually married and had my sons, I was never the kind of fully present father that Richard clearly has been to Sarah. You seem like a good father to your sons, I offered, remembering the family photos Sarah had found online. I try, James acknowledged, but I missed a lot of their early years chasing tenure, accepting visiting positions, building my reputation. Richard gave Sarah something I'm not sure I could have: constancy, daily devotion, unwavering presence. He's an exceptional father, I agreed. Better than I deserved, certainly. James studied me for a moment. You've been punishing yourself for a very long time, haven't you? For the affair, for the pregnancy, for the deception. His perception startled me. I suppose I have, I admitted. I've spent 24 years trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect community member, as if I could somehow earn the right to the life I claimed under false pretenses. And yet the irony is that by all accounts, you've been an excellent mother to Sarah. Richard clearly adores you still, despite everything. Your deception didn't make you unworthy of the life you've built, Eleanor. Tears sprang to my eyes at his unexpected absolution. Why are you being so understanding? You should hate me for keeping Sarah from you all these years. James considered this, his expression thoughtful. Perhaps because I can see the situation from multiple angles now. As Sarah's biological father, yes, I wish I'd known about her sooner. But as someone who understands the complexity of adult relationships and choices, I can recognize that you were doing what you thought was best in an impossible situation. I was young and scared, I said softly. But that's no excuse for the magnitude of what I kept from both of you. We were all young once, James replied. We all made decisions that seemed right at the time. The question is, what we do with the situation we find ourselves in now. What do you want, James? I asked directly. What role do you hope to have in Sarah's life going forward? Whatever role she wants to give me, he answered without hesitation. I have no intention of trying to replace Richard. That would be impossible even if I wanted to, which I don't. But I would like the chance to know my daughter, to support her as she moves forward in her life. And your wife? Your sons? How do they feel about this sudden revelation? Understandably shocked, James admitted. But Beth, my wife, has been remarkably supportive. She's eager to meet Sarah when the time is right. And my boys are intrigued by the idea of having an older half-sister, especially one who's in medical school. I nodded, trying to imagine this extended, blended family structure that was taking shape around us. It was so far from the contained, controlled family unit I'd maintained for decades. I'm afraid, I confessed. Afraid that once the surgery is over, once Richard is healthy again, Sarah will choose to have you in her life, and not me, that she'll never fully forgive my deception. I don't think that's going to happen, James said gently. Sarah is angry and hurt, yes, but she loves you, Eleanor. That much is obvious even to me, a virtual stranger. She wouldn't be this hurt if she didn't love you deeply. I hope you're right, I whispered. Besides, he continued, forgiveness isn't something that happens all at once. It's a process, a journey. Sarah has already taken the first steps by understanding the context of your choices, by seeing you as a flawed human being rather than just as the perfect mother who betrayed her trust. His insight surprised me. You seem to know a lot about forgiveness. I teach 19th century American literature, he said with a small smile. The great novels are full of human failings, moral complexities, and eventual redemption. I've spent my career analyzing the ways people hurt each other and find their way back to connection. Despite everything, I found myself smiling in return. I can see why you became a professor. You have a way with words. So does Sarah, he noted. Another inheritance, perhaps. We fell silent then, both contemplating the strange twist of fate that had brought us together in this hospital, our daughter lying in an operating room preparing to give a piece of herself to save the man who had raised her. We should get to the waiting room, I said finally, glancing at my watch. The surgery should be starting soon. As we walked down the corridor together, I felt a curious sense of lightening, as if a burden I'd carried for decades was beginning to shift. The weight hadn't disappeared entirely. There was still much healing to be done, much forgiveness to be earned, but for the first time, I could imagine a future where the truth, however painful, created a stronger foundation than my carefully constructed lies ever had. The surgery was successful. Both Richard and Sarah came through the procedure with flying colors, as Dr. Patel put it. Richard's new kidney, Sarah's gift of life, began functioning immediately, his lab values improving even before he fully awoke from anesthesia. The days that followed were a blur of recovery milestones, medication adjustments, and careful monitoring. I split my time between their hospital rooms, sleeping in uncomfortable chairs, and existing on cafeteria coffee until they insisted I go home to rest. James remained in Salem, visiting daily but maintaining a respectful distance. He'd extended his leave of absence from Dartmouth, explaining to his department that a family situation required his attention. The simple truth of that phrase struck me each time I saw him in the hospital corridors, medical coffee cup in hand, his silver-streaked hair slightly disheveled from running his fingers through it, a nervous habit he shared with Sarah. A week after the surgery, Richard was strong enough to be moved from the hospital to a specialized transplant recovery center, where he would spend another 2 weeks under close supervision. Sarah, her recovery less complicated, was discharged with instructions to rest and avoid strenuous activity while her body adjusted to functioning with a single kidney. "I want to go home," she announced, as I helped her pack the flowers, cards, and personal items that had accumulated in her hospital room. I hesitated, unsure which home she meant: her apartment in Boston, the family house in Salem, or perhaps even James's home in New Hampshire, though that seemed unlikely. "To the house," she clarified, seeing my confusion. "Our house. I want to sleep in my own bed." Relief washed over me. "Of course. I've already prepared your room." The drive home was quiet, both of us lost in our thoughts. As we pulled into the driveway of the colonial house that had witnessed so much of our family's history, Sarah broke the silence. "Mom," she said, her voice tentative, "I think it's time we talked about what happens next." I turned off the engine but made no move to exit the car. "I'm listening. James has asked me to come stay with him and his family for a few weeks when I'm recovered enough to travel, to get to know them, to see if there's a place for me in their lives. Though I'd been preparing myself for this possibility, the reality of it still struck like a physical blow. "Are you going to go?" "I think so, yes," she said. "Not right away. I want to be here for Dad's recovery first, but afterward," I nodded, swallowing past the lump in my throat. "I understand. Do you?" Sarah turned to face me fully. "Because I'm not running away from our family, Mom. I'm not choosing James over you and Dad. I'm just trying to understand all the pieces of who I am." "I know that," I assured her, reaching for her hand. "And I support you. I do. It's just difficult to share you after having you all to ourselves for so long." "That was your choice, though," Sarah pointed out, her tone gentle but unflinching. "You chose not to share me with James all those years ago. Now I'm making my own choice to know both sides of my heritage." The fairness of her assessment was undeniable. "You're right. And you're an adult now. You get to make these decisions for yourself." "But?" Sarah prompted, clearly hearing the hesitation in my voice. "But I'm afraid," I admitted. "Afraid that once you get to know James and his family, you'll realize what you missed all these years. That you'll resent us, resent me, even more for what I kept from you." Sarah was quiet for a moment, looking out at the house where she'd grown up. "I can't promise that won't happen," she said finally. "I'm still processing everything, still trying to reconcile the mother I thought I knew with the one who kept this enormous secret." Her honesty hurt, but I appreciated it nonetheless. "I deserve that." "It's not about what you deserve, Mom," she sighed. "It's about what is. The truth is out now, and we all have to find a way forward that acknowledges that truth while preserving the real love and connection that exists in our family." Her maturity astounded me. When had my daughter become this insightful, compassionate adult? Had I been so busy maintaining our family facade that I'd missed her transformation? "When did you get so wise?" I asked softly. A small smile touched her lips. "I had good parents." The simple statement, delivered without irony or accusation, brought tears to my eyes. "We tried," I whispered. "Despite everything, we really did try to give you the best life we could." "I know that, Mom. I've always known that." We sat in silence for another moment before Sarah spoke again. "There's something else we need to discuss. The Salem Medical Gala is next month." I nodded, momentarily confused by the change of subject. The annual gala was a major fundraising event for the hospital, one our family attended regularly as Richard's school always purchased a table. "Dad will be honored for his 20 years of service on the hospital's education committee," Sarah continued. He'll be receiving the Community Service Award. I'd forgotten that was happening this year, I admitted, the revelation of our family secret having pushed such social obligations far from my mind. It's important to him, Sarah said, and I think we should all be there. You, me, and James too. I stared at her in shock. James? But that would mean everyone would know. Exactly, Sarah said firmly. I'm tired of secrets, Mom. I'm tired of pretending. If James is going to be part of my life, part of our extended family, then I don't want to hide it or explain it away, or create some sanitized version of how we're connected. But the gossip, the questions, I protested weakly. Let people gossip, Sarah said with a shrug. Let them question. The truth is that Richard Mitchell is my father in every way that matters, and he's receiving an award he deserves. James Calloway is my biological father who has come into my life recently, and he should be welcome at family events if I want him there. Richard might not want. I've already talked to Dad about it, Sarah interrupted. He agrees with me. He said, and I quote, I'm done with secrets too. Let the town talk. I know who I am, and I know who my daughter is. I shook my head in amazement. When had I become the only one still clinging to appearances, to what others might think? This isn't just about the gala, is it? I asked, suddenly understanding. This is about how we move forward as whatever kind of family we are now. Exactly, Sarah confirmed. I don't want to compartmentalize my life, Mom. I don't want to see James only when I'm away from Salem, or only when you and Dad aren't around. I want to build something honest and open, where everyone knows the truth, and we find a way to make it work. The prospect terrified me. The public revelation, the inevitable gossip, the questioning of the family narrative I'd so carefully constructed over decades. And yet, hadn't living with secrets caused far more damage than the truth ever could? Okay, I said finally. If that's what you want, and if your father agrees, then James should come to the gala. Sarah's expression softened with surprise and relief. Really? Just like that? Just like that, I confirmed. You're right. We can't build anything real on a foundation of more secrets and half-truths. If James is going to be in your life, then he needs to be acknowledged openly, not hidden away like some shameful secret. Thank you, Mom. Sarah squeezed my hand. That means more to me than you know. We finally exited the car and made our way into the house, Sarah moving carefully as her incision was still healing. As I helped her settle onto the living room sofa, she looked around at the familiar space with new eyes. It's strange, she mused. Everything looks exactly the same, and yet everything has changed. Not everything, I corrected gently. The love in this family hasn't changed, Sarah. It's just expanded to include someone new. She nodded thoughtfully. I like that way of looking at it. The month that followed was a time of healing. Physical for Richard and Sarah, emotional for all of us. Richard returned home from the recovery center. His color improved, his energy slowly returning. Sarah divided her time between caring for her father and cautious coffee dates with James, gradually building a relationship with her biological father. I watched this new dynamic unfold with a mixture of anxiety and acceptance, reminding myself daily that Sarah's connection with James didn't diminish her bond with Richard or with me. There was room in her heart for all of us, a concept I was still struggling to fully embrace. The night of the Salem Medical Gala arrived with crystal-clear October skies and the first real chill of autumn in the air. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting the emerald green dress I'd chosen for the occasion, when Richard appeared behind me, handsome in his tuxedo despite being thinner than he'd been before his illness. "You look beautiful," he said, resting his hands on my shoulders. "And you look like a man with a working kidney," I replied, turning to straighten his bow tie. "How do you feel? Physically? Better than I have in months." His expression turned serious. "Emotionally? Nervous about tonight." I nodded in understanding. "Me too. The whole town will be there. Everyone will see us with James. We'll realize something's going on." "Let them see," Richard said firmly. "I'm done hiding, Ellie. I'm done pretending. Nearly dying has a way of clarifying what actually matters." "And what matters?" I asked, though I already knew his answer. "Family," he said simply. "Truth. Love. Not necessarily in that order." The doorbell rang, announcing James's arrival. He'd agreed to meet us at the house so we could travel to the gala together. A united front, as Sarah had put it. Downstairs, I could hear Sarah greeting him, their voices mixing in the foyer of our home. Richard took my hand, his grip strong and reassuring. "Ready?" he asked. I took a deep breath. "Ready?" The gala was as elegant as always. The hospital atrium transformed with twinkling lights, flowing champagne, and Salem's finest citizens in their formal attire. Our entrance caused the stir I'd anticipated. The whispers, the curious glances, the raised eyebrows as people noticed James accompanying our family. Who is that man with the Mitchells? Is that Sarah's boyfriend? Isn't he a bit old for her? I heard he's a professor from Dartmouth. The speculations flew as we made our way to our table, heads held high despite the undercurrent of curiosity that followed in our wake. Midway through the evening, after the dinner plates had been cleared, and before the awards presentation was to begin, Marjorie Henderson, president of the hospital board and Salem's most notorious gossip, approached our table with determined strides. "Eleanor, Richard," she greeted with artificial warmth, her eyes flickering to James with undisguised curiosity. "Lovely to see you both. Richard, you're looking well after your surgery." "Thank you, Marjorie," Richard replied politely. "I'm feeling much better. And Sarah, dear," Marjorie continued, "how wonderful that you were able to donate a kidney to your father. Such a selfless act." "It wasn't selfless at all," Sarah corrected with a smile. "It was entirely selfish. I want my father around for a very long time." Of course," Marjorie nodded, her attention already shifting. "And who is your guest this evening? I don't believe we've met." Here it was, the moment I'd been dreading. The public acknowledgement that would transform our private family revelation into Salem's newest scandal. Before any of us could respond, Sarah stood up, her posture straight and proud, despite the lingering tenderness of her healing incision. "Marjorie, I'd like you to meet Professor James Calloway of Dartmouth College," she said, her voice clear and carrying to nearby tables. "My biological father, who has recently come into my life." The nearby conversation stuttered to a halt as heads turned in our direction. Marjorie's mouth opened and closed several times, her expression cycling through shock, confusion, and the unmistakable glee of someone who has just stumbled upon the juiciest piece of gossip in years. I see," she managed finally. "How unexpected." "Life is full of unexpected turns," Richard interjected smoothly, standing to join Sarah. "James and I are getting to know each other as we both support our daughter through her recovery." "Our daughter," James echoed, rising as well and extending his hand to Marjorie. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Henderson. I understand you've known Sarah her whole life." The three of them stood together, Sarah flanked by her two fathers, a united front of newfound honesty. I remained seated, frozen between fear of public exposure and pride in their courage. "Eleanor?" Richard's gentle voice broke through my paralysis. He extended his hand to me, an invitation to join them, to complete our unconventional family portrait. In that moment, I saw with perfect clarity the choice before me. I could remain seated, implicitly distancing myself from this public revelation, or I could stand with my family, my entire family, reconfigured and expanded though it might be, and face whatever came next together. I rose, taking Richard's offered hand and moving to stand beside him. "Yes, Marjorie," I said, finding my voice at last. "James is Sarah's biological father. It's a long story, but what matters is that we're all here together tonight to celebrate Richard's award and Sarah's incredible gift to him." Marjorie's eyes widened at my forthright acknowledgement. "Well," she said, clearly recalculating how to respond now that we were presenting a unified front. "How modern of you all. I'm sure people will find it quite fascinating. They're welcome to find it whatever they like," Sarah replied with a serene smile. "We've moved beyond caring about appearances." It was true, I realized with sudden clarity. We had moved beyond appearances, beyond the carefully curated image I'd maintained for decades. The truth, however messy and complicated, was finally out in the open, and somehow, the sky hadn't fallen. The earth hadn't opened beneath our feet. We were still standing, still breathing, still a family, just a different kind of family than we'd been before. Spring arrived in Salem 6 months after the transplant surgery, painting our street with cherry blossoms and the tender green of new leaves. I stood in our front yard, pruning shears in hand, cutting back the winter-dead branches to make room for fresh growth. So much had changed since that October day, when Sarah had discovered the truth about her parentage. Richard had returned to teaching part-time, his health steadily improving as his new kidney, Sarah's extraordinary gift, continued to function perfectly. Sarah had resumed her medical studies in Boston, now specializing in transplant medicine with a passion born from personal experience. And James had become a regular presence in our lives. Not an intrusion, as I'd initially feared, but an unexpected addition that had, over time, found its place in our family's reconfigured landscape. The scandal I'd dreaded after the hospital gala had materialized, of course. Salem was too small a town for it to be otherwise. For weeks, I'd endured the sidelong glances at the grocery store, the suddenly hushed conversations when I entered the church fellowship hall, the awkward attempts at fishing for details from neighbors and acquaintances. But gradually, as happens with all gossip, the intensity had faded. Our family's private drama had been supplanted by fresher scandals: the high school principal's affair with the PTA president, the embezzlement allegations at the town council, the surprise divorce of Salem's most prominent power couple. Life had moved on. We had moved on, though in a direction I could never have anticipated. "Those azaleas are coming along nicely," Richard observed, joining me in the garden. Though still thinner than before his illness, his face had regained its healthy color, his eyes their characteristic sparkle. "They're fighters," I agreed, stepping back to admire the bright pink buds forming on the bushes we'd planted together 20 years earlier. "Just when you think they might not make it through another New England winter, they surprise you, rather like families," Richard mused, slipping an arm around my waist. "Adaptable, resilient, capable of surviving even the harshest conditions." I leaned into his embrace, grateful beyond words for his continued presence in my life. "I never thought we'd get here," I admitted. "After everything came out, I was so sure I'd lose you both, you and Sarah." "You underestimated us," Richard said simply. "You always have, in a way." I looked up at him, surprised. "What do you mean?" "You spent decades protecting us from the truth because you thought we couldn't handle it," he explained. "You didn't trust that our love was strong enough to withstand honesty." His insight struck me with the force of revelation. He was right. My deception had been rooted not just in self-protection, but in a fundamental lack of faith in the resilience of our family bonds. "I was wrong," I acknowledged, "about so many things." "Not everything," Richard countered. "You were right that the truth would hurt. It did. You were right that it would change us. It has. But you were wrong to think those changes would destroy us." From inside the house, the sound of laughter drifted through the open windows, Sarah's bright peal mixing with the deeper tones of James's chuckle. They had arrived earlier in the day for our now monthly family dinner, a tradition that had evolved organically as we'd navigated our new normal. James's wife Beth was with them, her initial wariness having gradually transformed into a tentative friendship with all of us. His sons, Sarah's half-brothers, had visited twice, their initial awkwardness giving way to genuine curiosity about their newfound sister. "Should we go in?" I asked. "They'll wonder where we've disappeared to." "In a minute," Richard said, his gaze shifting to the maple tree in our backyard, where the remains of Sarah's childhood treehouse were still visible. "I've been thinking about something Sarah said last week. During her last visit, Sarah had mentioned possibly deferring her final year of medical school to participate in a research fellowship focused on improving outcomes for living donors." "The fellowship?" I asked. "No, something else," Richard replied. "She mentioned that when she first discovered the truth, she felt as if her entire identity had been built on quicksand, as if everything she thought she knew about herself was suddenly in question." I nodded, remembering the raw pain in Sarah's voice during those first devastating days after her discovery. "But now," Richard continued, "she says she feels more secure in her identity than ever before, that knowing all the pieces of her heritage, genetic and emotional, has given her a more complete sense of self. She told me something similar," I said, "that she no longer feels she has to choose between her connection to you and her curiosity about James, that she can hold both relationships as equally valid parts of who she is." "That's what I've been reflecting on," Richard said thoughtfully. "How truth, however painful initially, ultimately offers a more solid foundation than the most well-intentioned deception ever could." The wisdom in his words resonated deeply. For decades, I'd believed I was protecting my family by maintaining our carefully constructed narrative. In reality, I'd been denying all of us, myself included, the chance to build something authentic, something that could withstand scrutiny precisely because it acknowledged human complexity and imperfection. I've been thinking about something too, I admitted, about forgiveness, and whether I've truly earned it from either of you. Richard considered this, his expression thoughtful. I don't think forgiveness is something you earn through merit, like a badge or a promotion. I think it's something that happens naturally when people commit to moving forward together, to creating something new from the broken pieces of what came before. Is that what we've done? I asked. Created something new? I believe so, he nodded. We're not the same family we were a year ago. How could we be? But what we've become isn't necessarily worse, just different, more inclusive, more honest. From inside, Sarah called our names, announcing that dinner was almost ready. Richard took my hand as we made our way back toward the house. You know what I'm most grateful for in all of this? He said as we climbed the porch steps. That Sarah didn't have to choose between her fathers, that she found a way to make room for both of us in her life. That's a credit to you, I told him. Your generosity of spirit made that possible. Many men would have felt threatened by James's presence, would have turned it into a competition for Sarah's affection. Richard smiled slightly. I had an advantage James didn't. 23 years of being her dad. I didn't need to compete because I was secure in what Sarah and I had built together over a lifetime. As we entered the dining room, I was struck by the scene before us. Sarah stood at the head of the table, directing traffic as she arranged serving dishes. James and Beth were setting out wine glasses, moving with the slight awkwardness of guests who were becoming more comfortable but weren't quite family yet. Mom, Dad, Sarah greeted us with a smile. Perfect timing. James made his famous risotto, and I've managed not to burn the garlic bread for once. A medical miracle, Richard teased, moving to his customary place at the table. Speaking of medical matters, Sarah continued, her expression turning more serious, I had my 6-month follow-up yesterday. My remaining kidney is functioning perfectly, and all my lab values are normal. That's wonderful news, honey, I said, helping her transfer the bread to a serving basket. It is, she agreed, and it made me realize something important. When I first found out about everything, I was so angry. I felt like my whole life had been a lie, like I didn't know who I really was anymore. She paused, looking around the table at all of us. Her mother, her father, her biological father's wife. An unconventional gathering by any standard, but one bound by genuine care and a commitment to creating something honest from the wreckage of past secrets. But the truth is, Sarah continued, I've always known exactly who I am. I'm Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, a daughter, a medical student, a person who cares deeply about helping others. Learning about my biological origins didn't change any of those essential truths about myself. If anything, it just added another dimension to my understanding of how I came to be the person I am today. James cleared his throat, clearly moved by her words. I hope you know, he said, that while I regret not being part of your early life, I couldn't be prouder of the woman you've become. And that credit belongs primarily to Richard and Eleanor. Richard raised his glass in acknowledgement. To shared credit, he proposed, and to shared blessings. As we clinked glasses around the table, I was struck by a wave of gratitude so intense it brought tears to my eyes. After decades of living in fear that my secret would destroy everything I held dear, I discovered that the truth, however painful, however disruptive, had ultimately freed us all. It had freed Sarah to embrace her complete identity, without the nagging sense of something unspoken, something not quite aligned. It had freed Richard from the burden of complicity in a deception that had never sat easily with his fundamentally honest nature. It had freed James to know his firstborn child, and to experience a kind of paternal connection he'd never anticipated. And it had freed me from the exhausting vigilance of secret-keeping, from the constant fear of discovery, from the subtle but corrosive effects of living a life built on concealment rather than truth. As we settled into our meal, the conversation flowing easily around topics mundane and profound, I realized that what I'd feared losing, my perfect family, my carefully constructed life, had never really existed in the first place. What we had now, messy, complicated, expanded, and authentic, was far more valuable precisely because it was real. Sarah caught my eye across the table and smiled. a genuine smile that reached her eyes and reminded me of the little girl who had once looked at me with complete trust and adoration. That trust had been damaged, perhaps irreparably changed, but something new and equally precious had taken its place. Respect between adults who had faced difficult truths together and chosen to move forward with courage and compassion. "Mom?" Sarah's voice broke through my reflections. "You okay? You seem a million miles away." I smiled back at my daughter, our daughter, in all the complex ways that families are formed and reformed through choice as much as biology. "I'm not far away at all," I assured her. "In fact, I think I'm more present than I've been in a very long time." And it was true. After decades of living partially in the shadow of a secret, I was finally, fully here, in this moment, with these people, in this unlikely but authentic family we were creating together, one honest conversation at a time.